Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to Chris and the Thames Valley team for inviting me down to talk to you today. And as Chris mentioned, I'd like to look at the circular economy, but look at it in the context of how we make business future fit. By that means we need to rethink our business models. And these charts, which were featured in a blog on the World Economic Forum site called 24 Charts Every Business Leader Must See. On the left-hand side, we have indicators of what we might call human progress. And on the right-hand side, we've got indicators of what we might term human impact on the Earth systems. And they all have the same timeline. So they start in 1750, the beginning of the first industrial revolution, and they go through to the present day. So on the left-hand side, we've got world population at the top left, which has increased tenfold since 1750. Gross domestic product, things like fertiliser consumption, transportation, telecommunications, even tourism. And they all follow the same exponential upward trend. And unsurprisingly, on the right-hand side, when we look at our impact on the Earth, we can see the same exponential upward trend. Whether it's the greenhouse gas levels at the top, things like acidification of oceans, deforestation, land use change, and so on. So business leaders are asking how we can continue with that finite growth. And if we look at our industrial processes, this represents a typical process. So we take some materials, we make something out of it, we use it, and then we throw it away. And the materials, and they're obviously finite resources, they're not being renewed at anything like the rate that we're using them at. So we can summarise that global context by saying we've got exponentially increasing population and consumption, and exponentially increasing levels of pollution and waste. But all of that is reducing key things that we need to survive. So we're reaching a tipping point where demand is outstripping supply. It's as if we've built an industrial system that's a bit like a leaky hosepipe. We're putting value in at one end and then losing it all the way along the system. And one way to look at that leaky hosepipe is looking at structural waste, waste that's kind of built into the system that we don't even think about most of the time. But if we redesign those systems, we could do things differently. And this chart from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation shows some of the structural waste in the food system. And you're probably aware of the statistics on food waste, that around a third of food worldwide is lost between farm and fork. If we look at cars, the structural waste in that system as well. Cars in Europe are parked up for 23 hours every day. Typically they have 5 seats, but carry an average of 1.5 people. And only about 1% of the fuel that you put in the tank is actually used to move the people in the car. So all that structural waste is the very thing that Uber and Zipcar and so on are exploiting to scale up their businesses rapidly. So there are different ways to think about this, to think about how we utilise the resources. Another issue where we've got less than efficient systems is our methods of material extraction. So this photograph on the left is a ton of gold ore. It's what we start with before we extract some gold. So how many grams of gold do you think we extract at current rates from that 1 ton of gold ore? Okay, so those of you pessimists, you were right, it's 5 grams. So on the right-hand side, we have a ton of discarded mobile phones. And again, how many grams of gold do you think we can extract from those? Okay, about half of you, 150? Yeah, optimists, you're right. So if my pension fund was going to invest in materials extraction, I think I'd know which I prefer. Let's look at how we should rethink those business models. And so I like to use this Future Fit business benchmark, which is an open sourced, very detailed checklist that you can use to look across your entire business. And it uses these 4 system conditions from the natural step. And I like to turn those around so that instead of the negative, what you shouldn't do, you focus on what you should do. So it's about moving from a system where we're consuming those resources to a system where we use them instead, where we're cycling finite resources indefinitely, where man-made substances are safe for human health and for the environment, where we're regenerating those living systems that we depend on, and where business creates meaningful jobs and supports local communities. So a system where we can have enough for all, forever. And you could use something like this based on those same conditions to look across your supply chain and do a simple scorecard to work out where are the hotspots, where are the key risks, and perhaps where would you focus if you were going to do something different. So let's look now at what the circular economy is all about. So it's about moving from that leaky industrial system to something more like this, where we're starting off with genuinely renewable resources and then recycling all those finite resources. So recycling from end of use and from all the waste along the supply chain. And any process inputs, instead of wasting those, they either come back into the same process, so recycling water, recovering energy and so on, or you can use them to make byproducts and earn new value for the business by finding a way to make a waste from your process become an input from somebody else's. And we'll see some examples of that in a minute. And the key thing is this end-of-use loop. So it's about keeping that as tight as possible. So how can we make sure that the product's fit for reuse, for resale? If it can't be resold, can it be repaired, refurbished and remanufactured? So it's all about getting this loop closed. And this is the circular economy framework that I created to use as a structure in the book. And the central flow is the design and supply chain. So my intention here was to look for all the points where you could intervene in the process and find ways to make that particular element more circular. So it starts with circular inputs. So how can we change the materials so they're genuinely renewable or recyclable, and how can we use less? How can we design the product itself so that it lasts longer and it can be used more intensively, perhaps in a sharing system? And how can we design it so it's ready to be disassembled at the end of use without incurring lots of labour and energy? And the process design, how can we use that so that we're using renewable materials or recycled materials, or we're recycling something around the same loop? So companies are now even selling solvents as a service. Rather than selling you the solvent itself, they provide it as a service, and they recover it, clean it up, and bring it back to you for reuse. And lastly, circular flows is about how you recover the product, the component, or the materials so that you can use it again. Above that sit business models, and lots of new business models are emerging to try and encourage these circular flows. So rather than selling a product, you might sell a service or a performance, and again we'll see some examples later. You might set something up so it can be a sharing system, like car sharing, or even, and I hate to use Uber as an example again, but Uber, kind of using a platform and bringing resources in when they're needed. And underneath we have enablers and accelerators. Enablers are things that can help the circular economy, so different ways of thinking, like biomimicry and green chemistry and systems thinking, or technologies, so 3D printing, the Internet of Things and big data can all help the circular economy. So the whole purpose is to design a system that's built to cycle things instead of this linear process where we're leaking things all the way through. So let's look at some examples in the context of circular supply chains. So wanted to make sure I didn't get accused of plagiarism. There were lots of nice circular economy diagrams. This is my rectangle of recovery. And by closed loop, that means the resources stay within the same business. So you're recovering your own materials for reuse. And then there are two types of open loop system. So it might be open loop where you're exchanging resources with another company in the same sector, or open loop where you're swapping resources with a completely different sector. And a simple example to start with is orange juice processing. So the waste products can be reused in different ways. So pulp can go into food manufacture as a thickener, and pectin can go into jam making and so on. So lots of reuses for food. So that's kind of an open loop but into the same sector. And orange essential oil, from the peel, are valuable for pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, so those are going into completely different sectors. So all of a sudden, instead of just one product, the orange juice, you've now got a whole range of byproducts, helping to make you and the growers more resilient. So the next example of a different design is pop-up and modular housing. So modular housing means you can make houses where jobs are needed rather than in the middle of an urban environment. So it reduces the noise and the number of heavy lorries needed on site. And if you're making houses in a factory, they can be made to much better standards of production and higher tolerances, so they're more efficient and energy efficient. And they can fulfil different needs. So this example from Lewisham was a temporary development to fill a site while a more complicated project was being planned. And after a couple of years, those very energy efficient and nicely designed houses could be moved to another site. So they were used for temporary social housing instead of people being in B&Bs. And then coming back to byproducts, so we probably wouldn't pick sugar as an example of a sustainable product, but British Sugar have got really skilled at working out how to get every % of value out of the sugar beet that they're already buying. And they started that process a number of years ago, and now earn 25% of their revenue from byproducts. So it's all about getting every last percentage from the resource that you've already paid for. And you can see some of the supply chain challenges of those different byproducts. So let's think about how you might start the journey if you want to try and move your organisation towards circular approaches. And you could use a tool like the Future Fit Business Benchmark to identify the hotspots. Where are the key risks for both the short term and the long term? Is there a critical resource that's got volatile costs or has some kind of ethical or security of supply issues? And so how could you replace that? Are you buying something that's recyclable but it's not recycled? What could you do to change that? So it's about looking for risks and issues and opportunities and choosing some short-term projects that you can then reinvest the benefits for longer-term wins. And it doesn't matter where your company is on the sustainability journey. So even if they haven't got started, you could still do things in logistics using back office materials and consumables, facilities management. You can buy tyres by the mile rather than buying tyres themselves. You could collaborate with your neighbours and maybe consolidate waste flows so that you can turn something that's a cost into a revenue. By consolidating and getting more volume, it then becomes worth baling it and making it a purer stream that becomes more attractive to the buyer. So it's all about how you can get more value from the things that are being wasted at the moment. So we need to rethink. And it's about moving from that linear, leaky system to something where we use and reuse instead of discarding, where we can have enough for all, forever. And I'd like to finish with this quote from Ray Anderson, founder of carpet company Interface, which I think sums it up brilliantly. So we should take nothing, waste nothing, do no harm, and do well by doing good, at the expense not of the planet, but of less alert competitors. Thank you.